Hi, welcome to this Blender 2.8 stylized dragon tutorial. What you're going to learn in this tutorial is how to take basic shapes and then use the boolean modifier to form those basic shapes into a combined mesh. You're then going to learn how to take that mesh into sculpt mode. In sculpt mode, you're going to add further details to the mesh. Additional things you're going to learn are how to make teeth and gums, how to make eyeballs as well as eyelids. You're going to learn how to use masks to make features like you see here with this armor here in the front, as well as the armor in the back. You're also going to learn how to make an image to use as a brush to form the scales that you see here. This tutorial is a fully narrated tutorial. This tutorial is taught in a step-by-step fashion. I try to say not only what I'm doing, but why I'm doing what I'm doing at the time. I also try to say every shortcut key that I can think of to say. So thank you for taking a look at this tutorial. I want to give a shout out to my two patrons, Kelly Johnson as well as Adrian Aquila, PhD. I just want to thank you guys very much for being my patrons and help me to make more videos on this channel. Thank you guys again. I really appreciate it. If you like the videos on this channel, please give this video a thumbs up. That'll make the YouTube robots happy. Also, if you would like to further support the channel, please consider supporting me on Patreon. Thank you. Hi, this is Ali Arango of LittleGuyCGI.com, and today I'm going to show you how to make a dragon in Blender 2.8. So let's get started. Okay, the current date is June 25th of 2019. This is still the Blender 2.8 beta. The official version of Blender 2.8 is supposed to be released next month. However, this should remain pretty much what Blender is going to look like. So you should be good even if you're watching this in the future. Okay, if you are brand new to Blender, one of the first things you should know is how to adjust your viewpoint. So if you press 1 on the number keypad, if you have a number keypad, you'll go to front view. 3, you'll go to right view. 7, you'll go to top view. So I was just pressing the number keypad to do that. If you go to the upper left and click view, and then you come down to where you see viewpoint, you'll see these different settings here, and this pretty much will do very similar. You can get around here, and this will show you the shortcuts here as well. You also can go to the upper right, and if you left click and drag, you can rotate. You can also click to quickly maneuver around the view. So just some very cool angles and very cool options in Blender 2.8 to get around. I'm going to press 1 on my number keypad to go back to front view. Okay, in Blender to rotate around your object, if you hold the middle mouse button, you can rotate. If you hold Shift as well as the middle mouse button, you can pan. If you hold the middle mouse button as well as you can't do that anymore. Just trying to, oh, you can do it. Okay. Hold Control as well as the middle mouse button. You can have a smooth zoom in, zoom out. If you roll the mouse wheel in as well as roll the mouse wheel out, you can zoom in and out as well. Okay, in Blender, we're currently in object mode. When you work in Blender, you work in modes. So we're in object mode. If you look to the upper left, you can see we're in object mode. If you click on this arrow looking thing, you can see we have edit mode, scope mode, vertex mode, weight paint mode, texture paint mode. What we'll be doing mostly through this tutorial is moving between object mode, edit mode, as well as sculpt mode. Okay, as we work our way through this tutorial, we're not going to use reference art, at least not on the screen. I probably have it 2 screens set up. I probably will glance at some reference art off the screen, but we're not going to be bringing reference art and basically lining our 3D mesh up on top of that art. So I'm going to press 1, there we go, to go to front view. I'm going to left click on this cube. I'm going to press X to bring up our delete menu. I'm then going to choose delete to delete the cube. I am then going to hold shift, press A. This brings up our add to menu. I'm going to go to mesh and then select UV sphere. So I'm going to left click right here. So now we have this UV sphere that we just brought in. Okay, this UV sphere is going to be the main part of our dragon's skull. I'm going to hold Control and then press 2. Let's try that again. Hold Control, press 2. There we go. When I held Control and pressed 2, what happened was that was a shortcut to put a subdivision surface of 2 on this sphere. So if you look to the upper right, you can see we're in front orthographic view. That's where you want to be. What we're going to do now is I'm going to hold shift, press A. This brings up our add to menu. I'm then going to select a cube to bring cube in. I'm going to go to our upper left. I'm selecting the move tool. I'm going to take this cube and move this straight up. And what we're going to do with this cube is we're going to press S to scale on the Z axis and make this cube longer, like you see there. And what we're going to do with this cube is going to be the basic building block that we're going to use to make most of our dragon. Okay, with this cube selected, we're going to put a subdivision surface modifier on this. We're going to hold Control, press 2. You can see there's the subdivision surface modifier on this. See how the shading looks, how it looks? If we right click, we can then left click on Shade Smooth to deal with that. What we're going to do now is we're going to go to our upper left. We're going to left click and then go to Edit Mode. Here in Edit Mode, what we want to do is put a loop cut in to have this not be a totally square, but to have it more squarish. So I'm going to hold Control, press R. And when I move my mouse, you can see there's that line right there. That's our first loop cut. I'm going to left click once. Because I left click this once, I can move the loop cut. So I'm moving this up, not all the way to the top, close to it. Then I'm going to left click again to lock that in. I'm going to hold Control, press R, move the mouse. You can see there's another loop cut. I'm going to left click, move this down. See how when I push the loop cut down, we have more form to the cube. I'm going to left click a second time to lock that in. I'm then going to left click on Nothingness to deselect. Okay, see how you see these vertices here? I would rather them be in the form of our mesh here. So what we can do is look to our right. We're clicked on our modifier tab. See this button right here over to the right? Looks kind of like a triangle with circles on it. We're going to left click there. And now we can see that our vertices are right aligned with our mesh right there. So with this done, we're going to go to our upper left hand corner, left click, go back to object mode. And like I said, this is going to be the basic building block for our dragon. So I'm going to press 3 on the number keypad. This put us into right view. If you're ever in question of which view you're in, just look to the left hand corner. I had mentioned orthographic before. What orthographic view is orthographic is a view that kind of like a blueprint view. It makes your 3D objects look very much like their 2D objects. If you want to come out of orthographic view, you look to your right, you can see this looks kind of like a grid. If I left click here, now when you look to the left, it says right perspective. If I go back and then left click again, now you can see we're in right orthographic mode again. Okay, so what we're going to do with this, we're in our right view. We have this selected. We're going to hold shift, press D, then right click. And we're basically going to take this shape and block out our dragon mesh. So I'm going to press R to rotate on the X axis, 9, 0, then left click to lock that in. And I'm moving this in position to, I pressed S to scale to basically start to form the dragon's upper part of its mouth. I'm going to press S to scale on the Z axis. Then S to scale on the X axis. Oh, wrong thing. S to scale on the Y axis is what you want. Okay, we're going to take the move manipulator and push this down some like this. I'm then going to hold shift, press D, right click. So I duplicated another part of the mouth. I'm going to bring this back some. I'm going to press S to scale on the Z axis. And this is just very basic blocking. No, this nothing here has to remain this way. So now I have them both selected. With shift I use to select both of them. Them being these two pieces right here. Now I'm going to left click here, hold shift, press D, right click. So we just have this piece up here so we can just easily grab it. Press S to shrink this down. So here we're setting up the basic neck of our dragon. I'm going to hold shift, press D, right click, then bring this piece down like this. Okay, so I'm going to left click here, hold shift, press D, right click, bring this down. I'm going to hold the middle mouse button as well as shift to pan this up. I'm going to press R to rotate on the X axis, 9, 0. Then left click to lock that in. Press S to scale to make this bigger. Press R to rotate on the X axis to tilt that. Something like that. I'm going to hold shift, press D, right click. Bring this back, press R to rotate. Now, one of the nice things about being in orthographic mode is we can just press R and rotate. If we were in perspective mode, we probably would be better off rotating and on axes. So I'm going to hold the middle mouse button to rotate just to take a look to see what we have so far. I'm going to press S to scale on the Y axis to make this shorter. Want this down more like that. So now we're going to left click here, hold shift, press D, then right click. I'm going to hold the middle mouse button to rotate our view. I'm going to take this move manipulator to pull out our duplicate. I'm going to push this down, move this so it's in line with our body. This is basically our upper arm here. Press S to scale on the Z axis. Like that. Hold the middle mouse button to rotate the view. I'm going to bring this to the side. So I'm going to left click here, press S to scale on the X axis like this to make this wider. And what we're going to do here is we're going to work on this side of the body. Whoops. I'm going to right click to undo that. And an interesting thing as I do this is I found out a little while ago I have apparently tennis elbow from clicking my mouse finger. It sounds strange. You would have tennis elbow from clicking the button on your mouse, but if you're ever doing a lot of mouse work and you have get some pain in like your upper arm, you might have tennis elbow. So I am using my left hand. I'm right-handed. I'm using my left hand to work through what we've done so far. Using my left hand actually isn't that impressive because right before I started design school, my right hand was hurt, so I actually went all the way through design school with my left hand. So for the most part, I became ambidextrous. Though recently, well, not so recently, I prefer to use my right hand, but I can use my left hand. So we have the upper arm here. So what I'm going to do is press 3 on the number keypad to go back to right view. Remember, if you don't have a number keypad, you can go to view, viewpoint, and then go to right, and that will let you go in that right view. Okay, so with this mesh piece selected, we're going to hold shift, press D, right click. And by the way, as you're forming these different pieces, you want to make sure that you're in object mode. You should not be in edit mode. If you're in edit mode, you could, duplicate these pieces like you're seeing me do. However, you want to be in object mode. So with this piece duplicated, I'm going to push this down. I'm going to press R to rotate. Now, if I wanted to make this longer, right, if I press S to scale, then Z, see how that line, the preview line, is going straight up and down? However, what I can do is I can press Z again, and when I pressed it a second time, now you can see that we can scale, like you would think that you should scale, like along with the shape that we're using. I'm actually going to click here, press S to scale on the Y axis. I'm going to press Y. Oh. Press S to scale on the Y axis and make this shorter. Press S to make this bigger. S to scale on the Y axis to make this shorter. So I'm going to grab this piece like this, press S to scale on the Y axis to make this shorter. As you're doing this, you want your pieces to overlap, by the way. I'm going to hold shift, press D, right click. I'm going to press 3 on my number keypad to go back to an orthographic view. And I'm pulling out this piece right here. I'm going to press S to scale to make this slightly bigger. Push it down some. Click here, press S to scale on the Z axis. So I want this to be taller than this piece right here. Hold the middle mouse button to rotate. I'm going to left click here, hold shift, press D, right click. So I made a duplicate. I'm going to pull this back like that. I'm going to press S to scale. Make this bigger. I'm going to press, well, for it, I'm going to go to 3 back to our right orthographic view. I'm going to press R to rotate. I'm going to, nope, I meant hold shift as well as the middle mouse button. One cool thing is in Blender 2.8, if you're using a tablet, or because I am using my left hand, so I want to pan, right? So typically you would hold the middle mouse button as well as shift. You can also click this hand here, and this will let you pan. So it's just nice. You can actually zoom in and out here. You can rotate here. Very nice. So I'm going to press 3 on the number keypad. I'm going to take the hand and pan up that way. With this selected, I'm going to hold shift, press D, right click, pull this down. I'm going to click here. I just wanted to make sure I didn't have a duplicate there, so I'm going to right click. So with this, I'm going to click here, press S to scale. Move this up, press R to rotate like this. I press S to scale on the Y axis like that. I'm going to hold shift, press D, then right click. Move this back, press R to rotate like this. Now I'm thinking. I'm going to left click here. I'm going to press 3 to go back to our orthographic view. I'm going to push this forward. Bring this down. Press R to rotate like this. And press S to scale to bring this up. I'm going to hold shift, press D, right click, bring this down like that. I'm going to click here, hold shift. While holding shift, I click those pieces there, bring this forward, click here, press R to rotate like this. Click here, press S. Oh, not that much. S. Click here, press S. Click here, hold shift. Press S. Click here, hold shift, press D, right click, press R to rotate. That's the scale, then Z, flatten that out some. I'll hold shift, press D, right click. Bring this back. Right click. And press S to scale on the Y axis. S to scale on the Y axis. click here, hold shift, oh, that's cap lock, hold shift, press D. Right click, bring this back. That's the scale. Hold the middle mouse button just to see what's going on. I'll press 3. When I say going on, I meant from a perspective mode. So we'll bring this, we'll press R to rotate. I'll hold shift, press D, right click. That's the scale. Hold shift, press D. Click here, press R to rotate. Shift D to duplicate. Shift D to duplicate. Okay. Okay, I'm switching to my right hand. What we're going to do is I'm going to left click on Nothingness to deselect. I'm going to go to the upper right and then left click on this button that lets us switch between perspective as well as orthographic. I'm going to click this select box up top. I'm going to left click and drag all of these pieces of the body here. I'm going to press M, which brings up our ability to, or our move to collection menu. I'm going to select new collection. I'm going to name this body, then press enter, then click OK. I'm going to left click on Nothingness to deselect. I'm going to hold the middle mouse button to rotate the view. We still have our 3D cursor in the center of our view, which is good. I'm going to press 3 on the number keypad to go back to right view. I'm going to hold shift, then right click. And when I did that, that moved the 3D cursor to right here. I'm going to hold shift, press A. This brings up our add to menu. I'm going to select cube. And then with this cube selected, I'm going to go to the upper left click, go to edit mode. I'm then going to not that. Right click, there we go. Subdivide. Once I subdivided, so I right clicked and then I selected subdivide, right? When you look to the bottom left, you'll see the subdivide menu. I'm gonna left click the arrow. See the smoothness here? We're gonna drag this up. There used to be before in Blender something called subdivide smooth. Now we just take the smoothness and move it up. Pretty much get the same result. I'm gonna left click on Nothingness to deselect. I'm then gonna go to the upper left click, then go to object mode. With this object here, we're gonna hold shift, press D, right click, go to our left, select the move tool, and then we're gonna basically put this to basically in the place of our joints in a sense. So I'm going to put that here. I'm going to hold shift, press D, then right click. That lets me duplicate. I'm going to click here to go back to orthographic mode. I'm going to say okay. So I'm in orthographic mode, so I need to press 3. There we go. So I'm moving this duplicate to here, holding shift, press D, right click, moving this duplicate of the shape to here. With these shapes, one of the reasons why I use this is we're going to use a boolean modifier. That's the plan, to merge all these pieces together. Some shapes merge easier than others. This shape tends to work fairly well. I'm going to hold Shift, press D, then right click, then move this up to here. Okay, with this selected, I'm going to hold Shift, press D, right click, move this back. You can see I'm moving this to wherever there's going to be like a space between a joint. I'm going to hold Shift, press D, right click, then move this here. Okay, I'm going to hold them in the mouse button. Just to take a look. I'm going to press C. Well, I'll left click on Nothingness to deselect. I'm going to press C for paint select. Select this here. I right click to get out of that. I'm holding the middle mouse button to rotate. Just pulling all of this to the side. I think I'm going to do the same thing here. Whoop. Pull that to the side again. When you right click in Blender, if you move something, then right click, it's kind of like a small undo. So I think that's what I just did right there. I'm going to left click. I'm going to press C to paint select. Right click to get out of that paint select. Hold the middle mouse button to rotate. Move this to the side. Click back here. Press S to scale. So by pressing S and dragging my mouse, I made this bigger. I'm going to press S to scale on the X axis like this. The reason why we're working just on the sides is because we're going to take all of this geometry. At least the plan is to duplicate this to the other side. I'm going to hold Shift as well as the middle mouse button pan. I'm going to click here, hold Shift, click here. Move this up just so that's more out of the way. I'm going to left click on Nothingness to deselect. Okay, remember we put the pieces of the body into a collection. What we can do is look to our upper right hand corner to our scene collection. See this arrow here next to collection? We'll click that arrow. Now we can see here's our body. These are all the different pieces of our body in this body collection. If we click this eye, we can hide the different pieces of the body. And then what we can do is, we can either click here for the select box, or I can hover my mouse here, press B for box select, and drag and to select all of these pieces here. Now I can press M, which brings up our move to collection panel, and then I'm going to select body. So now those pieces are moved to the body collection as well. Okay, so what we're going to do now is left click here, hold Shift, click here. I let go of left click, or Shift, sorry. Press H to hide. I'm going to click here, hold Shift. I'm holding Shift so I can select more than one object. I let go of Shift and press H to hide. We did this so we can focus on the head. I just wrote my mouse wheel in. I'm holding Shift as well as the middle mouse button to pan. I'm going to go to View, go to Viewpoint, then go to Front. So this is the main, basis of our head right here. I left click here, right click, and select Shade Smooth. I wasn't sure if I'd done that before. I don't think I did. What we're going to do now is go to our upper left hand corner where we see Object Mode, left click. We're going to go down to Sculpt Mode. And then here in Sculpt Mode, I'm going to go to View, Viewpoint, and then I'm going to go to Right View. So we're in the right view here. If you're ever not sure of which view you're in, you can look here and you can see we're in right orthographic view. Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to do some work on the head. We're actually going to go back to the upper left. We're going to go back to Object Mode. We're going to hold Shift, press D, right click. We duplicated this sphere here. We're going to push this forward. bring this down like this. And basically what I'm doing is I'm looking at this line here. I'm pulling this back to this line, taking this top part, moving it to that line right there. We're going to go back to Sculpt Mode. We're going to change our view. I think it's easier to work in Sculpt Mode with using a matte cap. So we're going to go to our upper right. See this triangular looking thing here? We're going to left click there. We have these shading options. We're going to select matte cap. Then we're going to left click right on this gray circle. We're going to choose here. I'm choosing this because I think it's very easy to work with shading. Shadows make it easier for you to see edges. So it seems to me anyway. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we are going to use our grab brush here. Make sure we're in right orthographic view, which we are. We're going to press F, drag our mouse, and what we want to do is, I'm not doing anything yet. I didn't click anything. I want to pull this from here to here. So when I say this, I mean just this front part here. I'll pull that from here to here. Now I let go. I'm trying to get like a straight line. If I pull all the way, it kind of like bends in a U. So I let go, and then when I pull again, it seems to give me more control. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold the mouse button to rotate the view to take a look. See how this shape here and this are pretty much the same? When you come into Sculpt Mode, there's an automatic symmetry effect on Sculpt Mode. So when you use Sculpt Mode, so be aware of that. You can turn it off right now. It's serving our purpose, so we're going to keep it on. I'm going to click View, go to Viewpoint, and then go to Front. Okay, now we're going to go to here. So this is our Flatten brush. We're just left clicking again and again. Now I'm rubbing. Be careful. I'm going to press 1 to go back to front view. Now I'm holding Shift, right? When I hold Shift, I automatically use the smooth brush. So my hand is holding Shift right now. Just let go of Shift. What I'm doing now is I'm just looking through all the brushes. So this smooth right here, when I hold Shift, I automatically activate this. Even though you didn't see me click this, when I hold Shift, I activated that, and that's what I did for this right here. I held Shift, and this button temporarily, while I was holding Shift, was selected. When I let go of Shift, this went right back to what we were using, which was the Flatten brush. Hold the middle mouse button to rotate, just looking at what we have, and that's what I want for the most part. Okay, we're gonna click near the upper left, go back to object mode, hold the middle mouse button to rotate the view, take a look. I'm gonna click on this top sphere. I'm gonna go to the upper left, click to go back into Sculpt Mode. I'm going to press 3 on the number keypad to go back to right view. I'm choosing to go in the right. I can go into right mode by pressing 3, or I can go to view point, go to right. I can also click over here. I'm just choosing. I thought you might be wondering why I was doing that. To be honest, the microphone's in front of me. Sometimes it's easier just to go to viewpoint, than reach over past the microphone and push the 3 on the number keypad. Anyway, what I want to do is flatten this side out here. So I'm going to press F to shrink this. So I am holding the left mouse button and I'm rubbing, right, the mouse. And what I'm doing is I'm looking at this edge right here. And I'm looking at how close this edge is to here. So as I'm rubbing, that's what I'm thinking about. So now I see this indentation here. And see, that's what I meant about a matte cap color kind of helping you. You can see pretty clearly, like, this isn't quite flat, which is what I want. So now I'm going to hold Shift and then left click. You see how you can see that, like, shadow going away? That smooth is smoothing this out. So I'm still holding Shift. I just let go of Shift now. All right, so now I'm going to hold the middle mouse button to rotate the view. I'm taking a look. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to press F, push my mouse in. That lets us change the size. When you press F and move your mouse, you change the size of your brush. This edge right here, I'm going to smooth this out. So I'm going to press F, move my mouse in, make this smaller still. Right on that edge is what I want. Okay, with that done, now I'm going to press F, make this brush bigger. So I pressed F, pulled the mouse, made that bigger. I'm flattening this out. Now what this is right here that I'm doing here, if you're like, what in the world is he doing? This is, think of this as where the eyes go in at, right? So imagine like the eye socket being right here. The eye sockets being right here. This being the bottom part of the mouth here. This being like going into the eye socket. And this kind of like makes the eye socket there. So that's basically what's going on here. And then I'm going to go to Object Mode, click here, go back to Sculpt Mode. Okay, I'm going to press 1 on the number keypad to go to front view. Now with this selected, I'm trying to see this dip here. I'm trying to make this more flat. So that's why it came back to here. Like that. That's what I want. Now what I'm going to do is go back to Object Mode yet again. Click this top view right here. We're not in Orthographic View. We're in Perspective View. That's fine because we're going to scale on the Z-axis. We're going to press S to scale on the Z-axis. And then I'm going to left click. Now the reason why I scaled this down is when I scale this down and I have this flatten, this kind of pulls in. You can kind of see that from the shadow there, so it kind of like helps us form the eye socket. I like how this gets pulled in from scaling down, so that's why I scaled down here. Okay, so I'm going to click here, press S to scale in the Z-axis. Like this. I'm going to go back to Sculpt Mode, go to our grab brush, press F. Oh, I didn't, thought I clicked, there we go. Bring this over like this, put this up like that. Looking at of my brushes again, that's what I'm doing now. I'm going to go to the Crease Brush. The Crease Brush makes creases, so it pushes in. However, I'm going to press F. When you hold Control, you do the opposite of what the Crease Brush is doing. Normally it would push in. I'm going to use it to push out. When you use the Crease Brush on an edge like this, you'll make that edge sharper when you hold Control. So I'm going to hold Control. Wait a second. Go to Object Mode. We need to be selected on this. Now we'll go back to Sculpt Mode. Now with the Crease Brush, we'll hold Control. See how that sharpness is there? So the Crease Brush is very good for making sharpness like that. Okay, what we're going to do now is go back to Object Mode. I'm going to hold Alt, press H. This brings back our hidden geometry. And we're going to click here, push this down. We're going to press S to scale in the X-axis like this. We actually want this going to the back. Like back here, that jaw. We're going to press S to scale to make this bigger. I'm going to press S to scale on the Z-axis. This. Push this down. Click both of these, press S to, oops, Press the scale on the y-axis like this. Click here, as the scale on the x-axis. Click here, as the scale on the x-axis like that. Bring this down. Press S to scale on the z-axis. Click here, S to scale on the x-axis. S to scale on the y-axis. That's the scale on the z-axis. That's the scale on the x-axis. That's the scale on the z-axis. Yes, I know this looks very strange. Not lost on me how strange it looks right now. And basically what I'm thinking about as I'm doing this is we want our basic pieces for sculpting, right? So we want to have this so the simple shapes join easily with the boolean modifier. And we want to have enough mesh so that we can sculpt this once we join all these pieces together. Holding shift to press S to scale on the y-axis. So I'm not so concerned about how strange it looks right now. Click here, hold shift, press D, right click. I made a duplicate. So I just pulled that down. Okay, now I'm going to press R to rotate on the x-axis. It's one thing nice in Blender. See how that line is there, that line that came across? It lets us see how we're rotating. Now when I left click, that line disappears. It's cool. So here is like a bridge for the nose. Again, thinking mainly of later on. I pressed S to scale on the x-axis there. I'm going to press S to scale on the z-axis. See the preview lines pop up to help us out. I have these separated. This piece here separated from this piece here. I'm trying to hopefully make things easier for us. I'm going to click here, press R to rotate on the x-axis here. R to rotate on the x-axis here. I just want those pieces not to be touching. Okay, what we are going to do is look to our scene collection, and we're going to turn this eye back on so we can see the body again. I'm going to left click on Nothingness to deselect, press C for paint select, select different pieces of the body here. I'm going to press S to scale them down. Left click on Nothingness, deselect. Okay, I'm gonna Roll the mouse wheel to zoom in. Hold Shift as well as the middle mouse button to pan. Press S to scale on the Y-axis here. Back some. I'm gonna hold Shift as well as the middle mouse button to pan down. Click here, hold Shift, press D, right click, bring this down. Press R to rotate on the X-axis, 9, 0. Left click to lock that in. Press S to scale. So you have to rotate the middle mouse button when you're working in 3D, because in one direction things will look like you're moving in the correct direction, and you really cannot see unless you rotate the mouse. Roll the mouse wheel to zoom in, holding Shift and the middle mouse button to pan. I click S to scale on the X-axis here like this. I press Shift, hold Shift, press D, right click, so I duplicate it right here. I press S to scale this down, press R to rotate on the X-axis slightly like this. I press S to scale on the Y-axis, X-axis is it? Okay, Y-axis. Like that. I'm gonna click here, hold Shift, click here, hold Shift D, right click, and then move this over like that. Hold Shift, select these pieces, hold Shift, press D, right click, move these over like this. Click here, press S to scale on the X-axis like this. You want to make sure these aren't touching. I'm holding Shift. Shift has allowed me to select all of these pieces here. Actually, I don't want to hold Shift yet. No, I don't want to hold Shift yet. Sorry. I'm gonna click here, hold Shift, press D, right click, bring this down like that. Okay, so what are we gonna do with this? This thing is actually gonna be a claw to us. I'm gonna hold Shift. We're gonna go into edit mode. What we're gonna do is click right here, this dot on the bottom there. We're going to press O. When we press O, this turns on. And what this is called the proportional editing tool. And what the proportional editing tool does is it lets you move or affect more than one vertex at a time. So with this selected, we're going to press G. See that circle that popped up when we press G? That shows the area of influence, right? So now I'm going to press Z. You can see that circle still there. That circle is very useful. See when I pull down? Now I'm pulling just this vertex. I don't want to pull just this vertex. I want to pull some of the vertices around it. So I'm rolling my mouse, and you can see that area of influence getting bigger. To see how those vertices moved some? That's what you want. So now we're pulling this down. Like that. And that gives us our basic shape. Then what we can do is left click, go to object mode. Okay, we're going to roll the mouse wheel back. We're going to actually hold Shift as well as the middle mouse button pan. We're going to bring this shape up because we can use this in the future. So we're moving this up just mainly to get out of the way. We're going to hold Shift, press D, right click. We're going to move that shape back down. Hold the middle mouse button just to get a better look of it at it from the side. I'm going to press S to scale on the Z axis to make it longer like that. Okay, so now I'm going to bring this up. press S to scale. Hold Shift as well as the middle mouse button to pan. I'm going to press R to rotate on the X-axis, 90. I'm going to right-click because I didn't want it to do that, point that direction. So I'm going to press R to rotate on the X-axis, -90. Then left-click to lock that in, and that's what we want. Okay, so we're going to move this over here, rotate to view, press S to scale. Move this up. S to scale. We'll press R to rotate on the X-axis for slight rotation down. Hold Shift, press D. Right click. Hold Shift, press D, right click. Hold Shift, press D, right click. Then left click to deselect. Okay, now with all that work there done, I'm thinking now. What we're going to do is we're going to actually click here, press X to bring up our delete menu, then delete that. We're going to press C for paint select. Paint select is ideal for selecting multiple pieces of mesh. I right click to get out of paint select that are close together. We're going to hold Shift, press D, right click, and then move this forward like that. I'm going to press S to scale to make that slightly different. I'm going to left click on Nothingness to deselect. Okay, I'm going to hold Shift as well as the middle mouse button, pan down. Let's click here, the skull piece, press S to scale on the Z axis like this. Let's make that flatter. Let's left click on Nothingness to deselect. We're going to hold Shift and then C. What that did was put the 3D cursor directly in the front of our scene. We're going to go to View, Viewpoint. We could also just press 1 on the number keypad. And the reason why we did this is we want to put an empty right here. So I'm going to hold Shift, press A. This brings up our Add To menu, and then we are going to select an empty. Once we go to empty, we have all these different shapes right here. I'm going to select a cube empty. An empty is a non-renderable object. Empties are actually very useful. Okay, looking here, when we look at this line should be right where our center is. So this does not look centered, neither does this. What we can do is left click here, hold Shift, press S. This brings up our wait a second. Okay, yeah. Snap to menu. So what we want to do is pull this to the cursor, this being the highlighted selected part, just so that this being this part is now, you can see that directly in the center. What we'll do is this whole center part here, holding Shift, selecting all these pieces. I'm going to go to View, Viewpoint, Front, hold Shift, press S, choose selection to cursor offset. Oh, I thought it might make them all bunch up. It didn't, so that's actually a good thing. So we're pulling this back. We're not in a right orthographic view. button now. I just use the move tool to work with that. I'm going to press 1 on my number keypad. See how that you can see that this middle is straight now, and that's important for later on. So I'm going to left click now to deselect. I'm going to hold the middle mouse button and rotate the view. I'm going to bring this down. I want the neck to seem longer. So to do that, I'm going to press C for paint select. I'm going to roll my mouse to make the paint select bigger. So I have all this selected. I'm going to right click to get out of paint select. I'm going to bring this down like that. I'm going to left click. I want there to be another part here for this arm, so I'm going to hold shift, press D, right click. I press S to scale, then S to scale on the Z axis. So I scaled this up and then I just scaled it on the Z axis down some. This here is directly in the center. I want there to be like another piece for the body here. So I'm going to click here, hold shift, press D, right click. I made a duplicate of this. I'm bringing this down. I am going to push this to the front here. I'm going to press S to scale on the Y axis like that. Then S to scale to make that bigger. S to scale on the X axis like that. I'm going to left click on Nothingness to deselect. Okay, I'm going to hold the middle mouse button and rotate the view. I'm going to click here, press S to scale on the Z axis like this. Bring that up some like that. I'm going to left click on Nothingness to deselect. I'm going to roll the mouse wheel back, click here, hold shift, press D, right click. I duplicated this. So here it is. We're going to make some wings. So push this here. Press R to rotate on the Y axis like this. We'll press R to rotate on the X axis like this. We'll press we'll hold Alt, press S. Whoops, didn't want to do that. Right. Okay, we're gonna roll the mouse wheel to zoom back. Well, actually, before we do that, we're gonna click here, hold the middle mouse button to rotate the view, press S to scale on the Z axis, like this. Pull that back slightly, up slightly. Click here, hold the middle mouse button to rotate. We'll press S to scale this up. We'll press S to scale on the X axis like that. I'm going to hold Control as well as the mouse button to get a smooth zoom back. Yeah, let me roll the mouse wheel in. Zooms pretty good just with rolling the mouse. Before, I remember zooming and the zoom seemed to be more of a jump. Seems better now. I'm going to hold Shift, press D, right click, duplicate this right here. I'm going to press S to scale on the Z axis like this. We're basically working on wings now. So what I'm trying to do is see this area right here. That's I want this to be. I'm going to press R to rotate on the Y-axis, tilted out like this. And I want to press R to rotate on the X-axis like this. going to click here, hold Shift, press D, then right click. So now I have another duplicate piece here. I'm going to press S to scale and the Z axis like this. Okay, I'm going to hold them the mouse button to rotate the view. Move this like this. Click here, hold Shift, press D, right click. Move this down here. Press S to scale. Press S to shrink this some. S to shrink this some. Really, this should probably be about not too distant in size from this limb here. Click here, press S to scale on the Y axis. I'm making this bigger just so that this can push into this. You know, this wing part is what I mean when I say push in, for when we do the boolean modifier. Press S to scale. I'm going to hold Shift, press D, right click. Bring this here, press S to scale and then Z axis like this. Press S to scale this down. S to scale on the Z axis like that. I'm pushing this towards here. Click here, hold Shift, press D, right click, bring this up here like that. Okay, with this selected, I'm going to hold Shift, press S, then I'm going to choose cursor to selected, so the cursor is there now. Okay, I left click this. We want 4 duplicates of this, so I'm going to hold Shift, press D, right click, hold Shift, press D, right click, Shift, press D, right click. With this here, we're going to go to where we see this global here. This is near the upper middle of the screen. We're going to left click and then select cursor. And this is basically our pivot point options. So because we selected cursor, these duplicates that are on top of each other, so they look like they're one thing, but they're multiple, will rotate here. So what we should be able to do is press R to rotate on the x-axis. Okay, it's not transform rotation. Oh, wait a second. Oh, sorry. Global. This is what we want. Apologize. We want the 3D cursor here. So with this selected now, these pieces should rotate with that there. So we're going to press R to rotate on the x-axis. Like that. Click another one. Press R to rotate on the x-axis. Like that. click R, we'll click here, press R to rotate on the x-axis, like that. We'll click here, press R to rotate on the x-axis, like this. Okay, I'm gonna hold the mouse button to see from this. So these are straight back. We don't want that. So we're gonna hold Shift. While holding Shift, we can select multiple objects. Then we're gonna press R to rotate. Is it Z-axis? It's out to the side like that. Then I'm gonna left click to deselect. I'm gonna hold the mouse button to rotate the view. I'm gonna click here. Let's change this pivot point back to the medium point, which is the default pivot point for Blender. We'll press that's the scale on the Z-axis twice. This one should be longer than the other pieces. I don't necessarily want these all running into each other because they're might cause issues for ourselves as far as the when the boolean process comes up when we don't necessarily have to. This is one of the things where it's very nice, Blender's ability where you can see like what's touching what. The outline from Blender 2.8 is very nice. I'm gonna click here, press R to rotate on the x-axis. R to rotate on the x-axis. Click here, press R to rotate on the z-axis. I'm going to left click on Nothingness, deselect, hold Shift as well as the middle mouse button to pan. Okay, I'm going to hold Shift as well as the middle mouse button to pan down. I'm going to click here, press S to scale on the Z axis like this. Bring this up, click here, hold Shift, press D, right click, made a duplicate. Bring this over here like this, press S to scale. R to rotate on the x-axis to tilt that back. Click here, hold Shift, press D, right click. Bring this down. Press S to scale. Press R to rotate on the x-axis 90. Now press R to rotate on the x-axis to rotate that more. You can see when it's hard to see where you're at without rotating your view. I'll left click on Nothingness to deselect. Okay, we're going to click here, hold Shift, press D, right click. This over, we'll press S to scale on the x-axis like this. These things do a pretty good job of being building blocks. I press R to rotate on the z-axis there for all kinds of stuff. Press R to rotate on the z-axis here, so I'm trying to see if we can use this for a wing basically. I'll go to Sculpt Mode just because I think this will make it easier for me to pull this into a wing shape. So I'm going to go to Grab Brush, press F to Bring this up. Make this even bigger. Working out better than I thought it would, to be honest. It's pretty good. Now check that out. Okay. Let's see, we have symmetry on here, so when we push, it gets thinner because of that symmetry mode. So, click, go to object mode, left click on nothingness to deselect. Thinking, sorry. If you're like, video froze, I was thinking. I'm gonna click here, go back to Sculpt Mode, press F to shrink our brush. That's pretty good. I'm gonna go back to object mode, click here, hold shift, press D, right click, pull this duplicate out, press S to scale on the X axis like this, press R to rotate on the Z axis, and I'm just trying to line this basically up with the wings there. That's the scale. That's the scale on the y-axis like this. R to rotate on the z-axis like that. I'm going to hold them in the mouse button to rotate. With this selected, I'm going to go to the upper left. I'm going to click on Sculpt Mode. We're on the grab brush. Pull that out. Press F to shrink the brush. Not too much. Hold them in the mouse button to rotate. Be careful with your wings that you don't have them bunched up on top of themselves. So we'll thin this out. Remember, the symmetry is on, that's why things look like they're thinning out like this. And also, whoop, not that. Hold shift to smooth this out. Thinning it out here. Okay, we'll go to the upper left. We'll go to object mode. We'll click this again. We'll hold shift, press D, right click. We made a duplicate. You kind of go to a top view, top-ish view. You press S to scale on the X-axis like this. We press R to rotate on the Z-axis like this. Basically lining this up with the wing. R to rotate on the Z-axis. Let's see, we wanted to go this way, so that it being this piece here. See how we have like our geometry going down, so let's rotate this on the, what is that, the x-axis. There we go. So like this line is kind of going how we would want the direction to go. Okay, so now we'll go to the upper left. We'll go to Sculpt Mode, and then we'll drag this out. Okay, and see how this is pretty far off. So for this, we'll go back to Object Mode. When I say far off, what I mean is see the space between this and this. We want this to look like it's the feathery part of the wing, so it's easier to go into Sculpt Mode. Not go into Object Mode and pull this over than trying to work with Scope. So now we'll go back to Sculpt Mode because we have this right here. So and we want to see these pieces of the wing. We want that to show prominently. So what we're doing there. One of the nice methods, I mean not methods, nice things about blocking in like this is you can you know, be very creative. I think it actually helps you to be creative. You don't have to think in so much the technical sense as far as right now. The one thing we want to do is make sure that we can work on our body without this getting in the way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click here, hold shift, click here, move this up. I'm going to left click here to deselect. I'm going to press C for paint select. We're going to select all of this right here. We have our 3D cursor still there, so we're going to go to our pivot point. We're going to set this pivot point to the 3 cursor away from the medium point, which Blender's default pivot point. What we're going to do is press R to rotate on the X. Oh, shift, there we go. R to rotate on the X axis. Just to mainly get this out of the way. I'm going to press R to rotate on the X axis. Don't want it too high. Okay, so now that we have this moved up, we can click here, hold shift, press D, right click. Let's change the pivot point from the 3D cursor back to Blender default pivot point, which is the medium point. So we'll left click there. We'll push this down. We need to fill in this area here. Let's press S to scale on the X axis like that. Press R to rotate on the Z axis like this. This will start to rotate on the X axis like that. We'll go to Sculpt Mode. So we went to the upper left, now we're clicking on Sculpt Mode. We're just dragging this out. So far, I really like this method of working, making these wings. It's so we want to not have this covered up. There we go. If your wings start to bunch up on themselves, hold shift. That activates your, where's it at? Smooth tool, there you go. Hopefully this will go through Okay, as far as the boolean, we'll see. Okay. Okay, so we have a lot of the blocking work done. One thing we need to do is we need to have this piece coming into the back of the head rather than like underneath. So we'll go to the upper left, we'll go to Object Mode. We'll click, hold Shift while selecting these pieces of the head. This doesn't, we don't have to select that. And what we can do is push this forward. We can press S to scale on the Z axis for this. Push that down, then hold Shift, press D, right click, bring this up, press R to rotate. We'll press S to scale on the Y axis. Like that. See if we can. It might not need that at all. We're going to press S to scale on the Y axis. I'm thinking we're going to left click here, hold Shift, press D, right click, bring this down. Push this over, press S to scale. You know what? I'm going to press X to delete that. Hold Shift, press D. I deleted that because I wanted this to be perfectly center. I'm thinking of just a shape for like the bottom jaw muscles. I was thinking about putting it, one of these on either side. I'm like, we really don't need to. I mean, it's right in the center. Plus, this is just a block out, so. This we're gonna press X to bring up our delete menu and then delete that. Okay, what we're gonna do now is adjust some of our shapes. So let's, this shape here for instance, we're gonna go to the upper left, we're gonna go to Sculpt Mode. In Sculpt Mode you have the Symmetry on, so for now that's fine. I'm using the grab brush because, and the reason why it's fine is because this is a center piece. There's not a whole lot of geometry, so that's why it's not it's a little difficult to grab. We're going to go back to Object Mode. We're going to click here. Now for here, we're going to go to the upper left, go back to Sculpt Mode, and then here in Sculpt Mode, what we want to do is actually turn off Symmetry. So here's Symmetry here. And see this X, we want to left click there, and now we can make adjustments that are non-symmetrical to this piece that we're currently selected on. We'll only be able to make, we won't be able to make a lot of adjustments because there's not that much geometry here, but we can change the shape somewhat. Okay, so I'm going to go to the upper left, go back to object mode, left click. I'm actually going to go back to sculpt mode, go back to symmetry, turn this back on. Now I'm going to go to the upper left, go back to object mode, zoom back. Okay, so let's mirror some of these pieces over. So first we're going to click here, then we're going to go to what looks like the wrench to the right. We're going to click there. We're going to go to what looks like a kind of like an arrow pointing down. Then we're going to select mirror. Okay, now when we select the mirror, we want to look to this. So we have a mirror modifier on this object now, right? See where it says mirror object? We want to left click here. We see all these options. We can press E, M, and then left click to choose the empty. And now we see this object being mirrored to the other side using the empty here as the basis for the mirror. Okay, so with that set up, what we're going to do now is I just pan the view down. I'm holding the middle mouse button. I'm going to press, let's hold shift, press Z. That made our turned on x-ray mode, so we can make sure that we select all of the different pieces that we want to select. So we're going to press C for paint select. So we have all of this here. I'm going to right click to get out of paint select. I zoomed in. I'm going to hold shift and the middle mouse button to pan. I'm going to hold shift, press Z. Hover here, press. Oh, so L doesn't select anymore. It used to select L. Oh, maybe that was in edit mode. So now I'm just holding shift. And I'm just selecting all of the pieces that we want to be mirrored to the other side. We can actually hold shift to deselect this piece. There we go. For now. So now I'm going to press C for paint select. We'll select all of this here. I right click out of paint select so I could rotate. Now I'm going to press C again. So now we have all of this selected. So I think we have all of the pieces that we need selected. We don't want the camera selected, so I'm holding shift. Okay, so with all of these pieces selected, what we're going to do now is we're going to hold shift. Actually, this piece isn't selected. Let me hold shift to select that. Now we're going to select this piece last, right? So I'm holding shift, and I was holding shift and I selected that. I'm letting go of shift now. This piece is highlighted, so it looks, I'm going to hold shift as well as the middle mouse button just to pan. This piece is brighter than these other selected pieces. This is the most recent piece I selected. It's also the last piece that I selected. So this is the active piece. So with this active piece selected, I can make the mirror modifier as long as the settings on this particular mirror modifier be applied to all these other pieces that are selected. And the way it works is you select everything like we did, select the last piece and the piece that you want to have the mirror modifier with its settings applied to all the other pieces, and then after doing that, you're going to do what we're going to do now, which is I'm going to hold Control. I'm holding Control now. Wait a second, sorry, I let go of Control. I'm holding Control. Now I'm pressing L. When I press that, and I let go of Control and L, we have our Make Links menu pop up. We're then going to select Modifiers. And then now we have the mirror modifier on all of the pieces that we had previously selected. So now I'm going to left click to deselect. Okay, so now we want to hold them in the mouse button, and now we can see this piece didn't get selected. So see here, and then here that piece is missing, so it's easy to deal with. We'll select here. We could select any piece to take the mirror, but we'll hold shift, click here, hold Control, press L to This brings up our Make Links menu. We will then select modifiers, and now we have that other piece. I'm going to left click to deselect. This piece right here needs to intersect with this, so we'll press S to scale to make this bigger. That back some like that. Push that down some like that. Roll the mouse wheel. Hold them in the mouse button and roll the mouse wheel again. Hold them in the mouse button just to take a look. I'm going to left click to deselect. Okay, I'm going to hold them in the mouse button and rotate the view. See this part here needs to be taken over. So I'm going to, when I say taken over, I mean taken over to the other side. I'm going to, with this selected, I'm going to hold them in the mouse button, rotate the view, hold Shift to select this to make that active. Now I'm going to hold Control, press L. This brings up our Make Links. And I'm going to go down to Modifiers. I'm going to hold them in the mouse button. So now we see this is on the other side. It being this also took on the Subdivision Surface modifier. So I'm going to click here, and I'm actually going to take that off. So hold the middle mouse button to rotate. I'm going to hold Shift as well as the middle mouse button to pan. I'm going to hold Shift as well as the middle mouse button to go up. I'm going to roll the mouse button to zoom in, hold Shift as well as the middle mouse button to pan up. I'm actually going to spread out these claws here, to make this easier for rigging later on. So I'm going to hold Shift, then I'm going to right click. I did that to put the 3D cursor right in the center here. I'm going to go up to our pivot point options. I'm going to change this from the Blender's default pivot point, which is the medium point, to the 3D cursor. I'm going to click here, hold Shift. Then I'm going to press R to rotate on the Z axis. I'm going to click here, hold Shift. Letting go of Shift, pressing R to rotate on the Z axis like this. I'm going to push this that way some. I'm going to left click here, hold Shift. Letting go of Shift, pressing, I'm going to press R to rotate on the Z axis. Click here, hold Shift, press R to rotate on the Z axis. I'm going to push this to the side. I'm just trying to give space here. I'm going to click here, hold Shift, press R to rotate on the Z axis. I did that because I could have some more space between there. So I'm going to left click to deselect. Okay, I'm going to roll out, zoom the mouse out. I'm going to click here, press C for paint select, select all of this right here. Right click to get out of paint select, press X to bring up our delete menu, then choose to delete. I'm going to press C for paint select. Select all of this right here. Right click to get out of paint select, hold Shift, press D, right click. I just made a duplicate of this. I'm going to take the, hold the mouse button to rotate. I want to just take this green part of this manipulator and just move this straight forward to here. I'm just taking a look now. I'm going to hold Shift as well as the middle mouse button to rotate, or pan, sorry. Rolling the mouse wheel to zoom back. Just taking a general look at everything now. Okay, I'm going to left click here. And remember, we're in object mode. So we're gonna now click here to the upper left is what I'm saying here. Go to Sculpt Mode. If you wonder like why, if you're like, well, I can see it on the screen, why does it say upper left? I was informed before that when people are trying to follow along with the tutorial, sometimes they'll look down and I'll say here, and when you're looking down, you don't see that. So they're like, can you say which area of the screen? And I'm like, they're right in what they're saying. So I'm trying to do that. So if you were wondering why I say like upper left, upper right, that's why. Okay, so I have the grab brush here, and actually I want to use the inflate brush for here. And I'm just left clicking. I was just trying to fill in that space there. Go back to object mode, grab this, back to sculpt mode. I still have the inflate brush. Same thing, I'm just trying to fill in that space there. Hold the middle mouse button to take a look. I go to the grab brush. Okay, so I'm going to go to object mode, left click on nothingness, deselect. I'm going to left click here, go to the upper left, go to sculpt. See if we can do this with just grab. I find that like if you grab and just pull, sometimes you'll lose some control, but if you grab, pull a little, grab, then pull again, seems like you have more control. I'm going to go back to object mode, hold shift as well as the middle mouse button, go down. I'm going to left click here. Go to sculpt mode. Just trying to fill in those gaps is what I'm doing. Holding shift as well as the middle mouse button to pan. I'm going to press F and then move my brush to shrink it. I'm going to go to the upper left, go back to object mode. Okay, people, here's where things get interesting. We're about to join this all together. We're going to use the bool add-on tool to do that. So you want to go to Edit, Preferences. Scrolling down. See right here, Object Bool Tool. Make sure you have a check mark right next to there. Okay, so what's interesting about this is we need for all of these pieces to join together. Typically, when you are blocking things out, you know, this is the basic plan that I have, right? Typically, the Bool Tool won't like certain objects, and those objects will disappear when you try to join things together. Most of the time, those objects tend to be things like the spheres here. Sometimes it's just the position of things. I already know some things that aren't going to work. So we're going to have to change things around. Also, fairly complex shapes like this, what we want to do is press the C key, select these wings. We'll select this here as well. I'm going to need this here too. So the C key on, but I'm just left clicking, kind of like to select it. I'm going to right click to get out of C, which is the paint mode. I was saying C key. You press C, activates paint mode, right? I'm going to press H to hide. That geometry. So I press C again. I'm right clicking out of paint select. I'm going to press H to hide that geometry. This right here, it's going to give us issues. So I'm going to press X to delete that. This right here is also going to give us issues. We want to replace this with a cube, which is fairly similar. So what we're going to do is with this selected, we're going to hold shift, press S, We're then going to select cursor to selected. So our cursor is right here. Currently our pivot point is set for the 3D cursor. We're going to change this back to the Blender's default pivot point, which is the medium point. We want to press X to delete this here. Hold Shift, press A. This brings us to our Add To menu. Bring in a cube. That should be fine there. This also is going to give us problems. I'm going to press X to delete that. I'm going to click here, hold Shift, press D, right click. And we're like, how you know, because in between editing, I tried some things and I saw issues, but it's not that much. I mean, I would prefer it to be originally how we had it, but it is what it is. This right here, and sometimes by moving objects around, you can get them to work better. I'm holding Shift, selecting all of this tail. I'm going to press X to bring up the delete menu. I'm going to click here, hold Shift, press D, right click. Duplicate this. I'm going to press S to scale on the Y axis like this. Roll my mouse with a zoom back. Press S to scale on the Y axis like this. S to scale just regular. Or rotate on the X axis. This is also going to give us issues. I'm going to left click here, press X, and then delete. So we're going to left click here, hold Shift, press D, right click. We duplicated that. We're going to push this forward like this. We're going to press S to scale. And we want this piece touching this piece as well as that piece, but not going through the bottom. I'm going to left click to deselect. Okay, what we're going to do now is let's click here. Now see how we have this cube here? The cube just comes right to this piece here. You do not want that. So we're going to press S to scale on the Y axis. Because you want this cube to be pushed far enough into this object as well as into this object so that they can be joined together. So I'm going to left click to deselect. Okay, what we're going to do now is we're going to left click here, press H to hide that. We're going to hover here, press B for box select. Select all of these different pieces together here. We have this light selected. I'm going to hold Shift to deselect that. We have all of this highlighted orange here, right? We are about to use the bool tool to merge this together. We're going to go to Edit, Preferences, scroll down, see this Object Bool tool. We have a check mark right there, so make sure you have that. We have this entire object selected. However, we need to have one object active. And with this body selected, what you want to do is have a center piece selected like this head. So I'm going to hold Shift, then while holding Shift, left click there. So when I left click there, I just let go of Shift. This is highlighted, this is brighter looking, the outline, rather than the rest of the body. So all of these pieces will be joined to the head here. It's important that they're joined to a center part like the head, because when we sculpt later on, the scope is going to be dependent on the pivot point. The pivot point that your body will usually have is, your body's going to take on the pivot point of the last object you selected, which is the active point, which is, the origin point of this object right there. Another thing to note is that you will not see the bool tool options unless you have an active point selected. So I'm going to press the N key. Then we want to go to Edit. So here we can see our boolean options. We want to use this auto boolean. If you have just your object selected and everything is highlighted orange, but you don't have an active part like this, you will not see these options. So you need to have everything selected, everything orange, and then the one active piece selected, which you can see is highlighted, brighter than the rest of the body, and then you'll see the auto boolean options. Okay, so with all of this done, we're going to click, when I say done, everything selected. With our active point selected, we're going to select Union. And this is excellent. We don't see anything disappearing, and that's what we want. Okay, so we have these objects joined. Now we need to make sure that we don't have any non-manifold objects. And basically what that means is we have to make sure the objects as they're merged don't have holes in them. So how do we see that? Well, we go to the upper left. You go to Edit Mode. We left click on Nothingness to deselect. We make sure we're on Vertex Select. We have Vertex Select, Edge Select, Face Select. This is Vertex Select here, which is what you want to be selected on. You're then going to go to Select. Select All by Trait. Now our object doesn't have anything currently selected, and that's what you want. Now we're going to go to Non-Manifold, left click here. See how we don't see anything light up? That's what we want, and that lets us know that we don't have any non-manifold objects, and we should be able to sculpt without issue. So I'm going to go to the upper left, click, and then go to Object Mode. Okay, what we're going to do now is hold Alt, press H. There we go. We're going to click on our main body, press H. We're going to zoom back, hold the middle mouse button to rotate. We're going to click, hold Shift, and we're selecting the objects we want to hide. We're then going to press H to hide those objects. There's another one here. We're going to press H to hide that. Okay, now what we're going to do is hover here to the upper left of our multiple objects. We're going to press B, select all of the objects. We can't see our Boolean option because we don't have an active object selected. So we're going to hold Shift, click here. As soon as we select it, I let go of Shift. As soon as we select an active object, we can see our Boolean options there. Okay, I mentioned to you before about you didn't want the pivot point of your object being off-center. We're going to do that here, but it's not going to matter, this pivot point, because we're going to join these wings to the rest of our body. So our pivot point is still going to be the center. What I'm talking about is when we go to sculpt, the symmetry based on the symmetry that we use to sculpt, right? Where we sculpt on one side and then the other side is, that other side is sculpted, is dependent on the pivot point. All right, so we're about to join this. The pivot point will temporarily be here, which would mess up symmetry in sculpting. But we're going to join this to our other body, so our pivot point should be directly in the center. Okay, so with all that being said, we're going to click. We didn't do it yet. We're going to select Union. This is good. Nothing disappeared. That's what we want. Now we're going to check and make sure this doesn't have any non-manifold objects. So we're going to go to the upper left, click, select Edit Mode, left click on Nothingness to deselect. We have Vertex, Edge, as well as Face Select. You want to be on Vertex Select. You're going to click Select, select All by Trait, and then select Non-Manifold. Nothing is highlighted. That is very good because we should be able to sculpt without issue. So we're going to go to the upper left, and then go to Object Mode. Okay, so this is all one piece. Our pivot point is right here. This would mess us up as far as using symmetry in Sculpt Mode. What we're going to do is hold Alt, press H, and now what we're going to do is we're going to left click here first, hold shift, and then while holding shift, left click here. This is our pivot point here, which is directly in the center. So once this is joined, our pivot point will be here. So we're going to go to union. This is joined. This is all one object now, which is good. Okay, now we're going to make sure that this doesn't have manifold issues. So let's go to edit mode, left click on Nothingness, make sure we're on Vertex select, go to select all by trait, go to non-manifold, left click, and we do not see anything highlighted. That's excellent. So we're going to go to our upper left, then go to object mode. Okay, what we're going to do now is left click here, hold shift, press H to hide those objects. We're going to click here. We're going to go to Sculpt Mode. Here in Sculpt Mode, what we want to do is look to our right, click the top button. We're going to go to Dine Topo, put a check mark here to turn on Dynamic Topology. Where we see this detail size, we're going to click here. We're going to change that to 5. We're going to look down to where we see smooth shading. We're going to put a check mark there. We're going to make sure with our symmetry, where we see mirror, there's this X is selected. Okay, what we're about to do now is we're going to left click on the simplify tool. We want to go to our upper right where we see overlays, left click, and then select wireframe. The reason why we did this is this will help us to work with this Dine Topo selection does is this lets us increase geometry where we want it to be increased and not have geometry increase where we don't want it to be increased. So what we want to do is to increase the geometry around the sections where our objects join up together. And then we want to use the smooth tool to smooth those areas out. When we have a brush in the sculpt mode and we hold shift, we will automatically switch to the smooth tool. Okay, so you can see what I'm talking about. We're going to zoom in, hold shift, holding control as well as the middle mouse button to zoom in. See when I click the tail, all that geometry was just made. Now I'm going to hold shift and temporarily I'm smoothing the tail. So I'm going to hold shift as well as the middle mouse button. I'm going to go here. I'm left clicking and dragging. And all of this geometry was made here. I'm going to press F to shrink my brush. I pressed F, I'm moving my brush. Now I'm holding shift to blend this in. So this joint right here. So I let go of shift. Increasing the geometry. Now I'm holding shift. I let go of shift to hold the middle mouse button to rotate the view. I'm left clicking. Now I'm holding shift again. And we're pretty much going to do what you see us doing here throughout this this mesh. So we increase the geometry, hold shift. And we're just making sure that these objects are well joined together. Hold the middle mouse button. So here. And what we're going to do is just look to where we see the joints needing geometry, and we're just going to try to fairly quickly increase the geometry and then come back and smooth once we have our increased geometry. Hold the mouse button, rotate. I'm not going smooth. Just increasing this geometry where I see things are joined together. Just hold the middle mouse button to rotate. Shift the middle mouse button to pan. So we're going to try to fairly quickly add geometry, and then we'll come back. If we need more geometry, we'll just add it when we see it, but we'll try to fairly quickly add in the geometry where we think it needs to be added in. So this really isn't any kind of creative sculpting yet. We're still doing technical work, and I'm saying that because the blocking, I kind of think it's creative somewhat, but kind of technical. It's not really kind of using some artistic skill, getting a basic shape, but the blocking is. This is technical, just trying to make sure that things are set up for once we really start sculpting, that things are ready to go. When I say sculpting, I mean like creatively sculpting, trying to make this dragon look as cool as we can. Trying to make it generally look cool. So again, I am going to, what I'm doing is I'm just looking for where the objects are joined together. Sometimes you'll increase the geometry on one side and not realize that on the other side you didn't do it on the other side. Okay, so now I'm just taking a look at this. What we can do is go in and start smoothing. So now I'm holding Shift, and I'm just smoothing where, if I see that it looks like there's no more geometry, I'll add it, but generally I'm looking to smooth where we added the geometry at. So I'm holding Shift. So we're basically using the smooth tool, even though it looks like I'm selected on the simplify tool. I mean, I am selected on it by holding Shift, though I'm using actually this tool right here. You tend to use smooth so much, it's built in the Blender so that you can, go right to smooth tool. Like when I look at this, I like how that is. So I'm not gonna really smooth that. Unless later on we see something, if there's a reason I'll leave that. But here, this is like a very obvious like ball shape. I'm smoothing this. I'm gonna roll the mouse wheel back, take a look at what we have. I'm gonna click the overlays, take off the wireframe. So now I'm holding Shift, and I had the wireframe off, so now I think we have the geometry for the most part where we need it to be. So now I'm using our ability to see more clearly without the wireframe to just smooth out some of these areas here. I'm going to press F, pull my mouse, to make that brush bigger. I'm just holding shift, is what I'm doing. Smoothing out these areas here. Obvious corners like this, smoothing them out. On the mouse wheel to zoom back. Hold the middle mouse button to rotate, holding shift. Just, continuing to smooth. Okay, one of the things we can do to speed up the smoothing is we're going to go to the upper left. We're going to go back to object mode. We're going to look to the right where looks like a wrench. We're going to left click there. And this is where we can add modifiers. So if you look at what we have now, we can use a modifier to help us smooth out the mesh. So we'll go to add modifier, left click, and we'll go down to the smooth modifier. So we'll left click here. So with this, what we're going to do is see where we see factor. We're going to left click here. We're going to change this to 1. And then where we see this repeat, we're going to click here. We're going to change this to 5. Okay, now this monitor here, if I click here, you can see like here's what things look like without the modifier working. And then this is what things look like with the modifier working. And we can use this to speed things up. So what we're going to do is we're going to apply this modifier. So now the smoothness is on this. Now we're going to go and start working with our proportions. So we're going to go to Sculpt Mode. And I'm looking for the inflate brush. Let's make this neck thicker, chest thicker, and that inflate brush lets us fairly quickly. We'll use this with the, oh, wait a second, let me show you this. I'll click here. Okay, so I am... oh, there we go. I was looking for dynamic topology. We want to have this off for now. So we're going to back to the inflate brush. We're going to use this with our smooth brush. So I'm holding shift to change our geometry. Start changing it. I'm going to press F to make the brush bigger. I'll hold Shift to smooth this out. Holding Shift just to make the tail somewhat pointier. Now I let go of Shift. Now I have the inflate brush. I'm just making the legs thicker here. Same thing with the top arm piece here. I'll press F. Shrink this. With this we can fairly quickly change our geometry. When we want to do use something like the smooth tool, but that's stronger, is this flatten here. So I'm going to left click on that. So yes, flatten works. So it seems to me like a stronger form of the smooth brush. We can use this even in combination with the smooth brush. So like we click on these edges, flatten will do a lot of work very quickly as far as getting rid of unwanted edges. I'm kind of like I'm using flatten and smooth together is what I'm doing now. Then we can go to grab brush, just pull shapes. We have this, triangular looking mouth here. We can press F, shrink this down. Just pull that in. And then from the head, how straight it looks like this, we can grab the head and start pulling it out. We can even push in here. I'm going to go back to inflate. I'm holding Shift there. I hold Control as well as the middle mouse button for smooth zoom. And if we are not getting what we want here, we can turn back on the dynamic topology. So I'm going to turn this dynamic topology back on. However, I'm going to set it to 10. So now I'm going to use the Blob brush. Press F. So I'm using smooth with the Blob brush to fill in some of this geometry. Now I'm just using smooth. Another thing we can use is the clay strips brush. There we go. We can use this with smooth. I'll control the middle mouse button to zoom in. My brain them. So basically what I'm doing is I'm looking at the smoothness, I'm looking at the shapes. You can use the snake hook brush. It's another way of we use grab. Another way of working with geometry. Okay, one of the things we want to do is, I just rolled the mouse wheel to zoom back. Shift as well as the middle mouse button to pan. And hold Control as well as the middle mouse button to zoom in. Shift as well as the middle mouse button to pan. See all this stuff right here? I want this smoothed out, right? Generally, right here, as well as the wings, I like how that looks. So for now, I want this to stay. This part here, I want this smoothed out, and these like things right here, this like rough, this rough look right here, I want that smoothed out. Okay, one of the ways we can do that is, what we can do is we can use something called detail flood. When we go to our overlays to our upper left and we click on wireframe, see how there the mesh, there's like this density of the mesh here as well as this density of the mesh here. What we're going to do is we're going to use detail flood to make the density pretty much the same all over. However, we don't want to do that as far as like right here, as well as the wings, because I said for the most part, for now anyway, I like how that looks. So the reason why we even want to do the detail flood is we want to put another smooth modifier on. Let's let the smooth modifier deal with most of the work of smoothing this out, but we want to keep the detail for now here as well as here. All right. So how do we do that? What we're going to do is we're going to hide the geometry here as well as here, and then use the detail flood. So that's what I'm going to show you how to do now. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to go to our upper left. We're going to go to object mode. We're going to press 3 on our number keypad to go to right view. Hold shift as well as the middle mouse button to pan. I'll hold Control as well as the middle mouse button to zoom back. When I press say Control as well as the middle mouse button, I'm like holding the middle mouse button and pushing it forward or pushing it back. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go to Edit Mode. When you look to your upper left-hand corner, you can see Vertex Select, Edge Select, Face Select. We want Vertex Select. We're going to grab this area here. We want to make things so that we grab all of the geometry that we select, not just what we see. One of the ways we can do that is by holding Shift, then pressing Z. This takes us into X-ray mode. In X-ray mode, we will not select just what we'll see. We'll select everything right here, including what is unseen, like the geometry behind what we have right here. All right. So for this part here, we're going to press B for box select. So now we have that geometry there. I'm going to move my mouse up to the side here. I'm going to hold Control, hold my right mouse button, and then drag to draw a lasso select around these wings. So now I let go of Control as well as the right mouse button. So now what I'm going to do is press H to hide. Okay, in Blender, there's multiple ways of doing things. This is a way that I use to... I want what I have just hidden not to be affected by what I am about to do. So I'm going to hold Shift, press Z. So we're out of X-ray mode. We're going to go to our upper left. We're going to go to Object Mode. Now we're going to stay in that upper left, and we're going to go to Sculpt Mode. So here in Sculpt Mode, what we're going to do is we're going to look to our right, see where we see Dynamic Topology or Dine Topo. We're going to put a check mark there. Click OK. Now we see Relative Detail. We're going to click this arrow-looking shape here, and we're going to change this to Constant Detail. Now when we change this to Constant Detail, when we see this remesh and we click this triangle here, we see Symmetry, Optimize, Detail, Flood, Fill. This is what we want. This right here, this setting will let you have more geometry or less geometry. Depending on what that number is. Okay, as far as having more geometry, if you take the number of this resolution up, you'll have more geometry. If you lower the number down, you'll have less geometry. We're going to keep this how it is. We're going to left click on Detail Flood. And when you look here, you can see that now the geometry is even. I'm going to hold Shift as well as the middle mouse button to pan up, roll the mouse wheel to zoom in. You can see the geometry is even over the mesh. Okay, so now that we have this done, we're going to go to our upper left. We're going to go to Object Mode. We're going to go to our overlays and the arrow right next to it, to the right of it actually. And we're going to unclick Wireframe. And now what we're going to do is we're going to click on this wrench that looks like, or click on the, it looks like a wrench, it's our modifier tab. We're going to go to Add Modifier. We're going to go to the Smooth modifier. We're going to go to the factor. We're going to change this to 1. And then we're going to go to Repeat. And we're going to change this to 10. And then press Enter. And now you probably can see why I did what I did. We lost a lot of the detail in the head, which it's fine. We got a much smoother look to our body. However, I just rolled the mouse wheel out. We kept the detail for the most part in our wings, as well as right here. And these would have been, this would have taken us some time to sculpt this back in. So I like how this is coming along right now. We're going to go to our upper left. We're going to left click and then go to Edit Mode. Then we're going to hold Alt and then press H, and then left click on Nothingness to deselect. We'll go back to our upper left, then go back to object mode. We'll probably use the smooth modifier again. Sometimes you'll look at meshes and you'll see them and you're like, oh man, it looks so nice. You know, like the smoothness of it. And a lot of times that you can get that smoothment, at least a lot of that smoothment from the smooth modifier. Okay, what we're going to do now is go back to Sculpt Mode. We're going to click near the top. We're going to turn Dynamic Topology back on. We're going to change this detailing back to relative detail, which is where I prefer it. You know, how I prefer to use the brushes in sculpting mode. I'm going to hold Control to zoom in. Now this is the more, I think, fun part, which is actually more sculpting. So with this dynamic topology turned on, I'm going to go to the blob brush. I like to use the blob brush to dig into mesh. If you take the blob brush and you use it without holding Control, it'll blob out. If you hold Control, it'll go in. So we see when I click this happened here, we made the geometry more even. However, that's why you see this shape right here. So how do we deal with this? One of the ways we can do is go like this, add some geometry in like this, and then hold Shift. You can also do this with the clay strips. So I'm just rubbing here this simplify brush. I'm adding geometry to this area here. That's why you see those slight changes going on. And then with them, now I'm going to go back to the blob brush, hold Control, and now I can fairly smoothly use the blob brush to push in. I'm going to press F to shrink my brush. So I'm holding the middle mouse button, just taking a look. I'm going to hold Control. Trying to get some indentation, if you will, around the eyes. I like the blob brush because it just adds geometry very quickly, so I'm not holding Control. I'm just building up like this area around the eye here. Bridge here. And we can hold Shift and like smooth this out. I'm gonna zoom in. See, when I rolled the mouse wheel, we had a jump, so I'll hold Control, hold the middle mouse button, then we can have a smooth zoom. You can also pull here. If you hold Shift, does it affect it here? Holding Shift, I'm not sure. Anyway, this is a nice way to zoom as well. I'm going to hold Control, hold the middle mouse button for myself since I'm used to that. Holding Shift and middle mouse button to pan, hold the middle mouse button to rotate. What I'm doing here is I am putting just building up this nostril area right here. I'm going to hold Control as well as the middle mouse button to zoom back. Shift and middle mouse button to pan. My thought process here is just trying to do not super general shapes, but basic shape of what I want somewhat of what I want the face to look like, just to get it started. The current plan. A lot of times when you are working in sculpt mode, it's nice to not have to be concerned about affecting another area. See right here near our bottom left, we have this box mask. What we can do is left click here, go to like outside the range of our head, over to the left, draw a box using the box mask brush. And basically what's going on here is we put a mask on this sculpt, right? So as we work here, this is protected, this area that has the mask on it. If you need to draw without a box, you can hold Ctrl as well as Shift as well as the left mouse button. Just left click and drag that, and you can draw a mask. And I believe you can do that while you're on other brushes as well. While we have this protected, what I'm looking at this thing and what I want to do with it. I'm going to go to the grab brush, just shaping this. I'm figuring I'm flattening out this part right here. This part, I selected the Blob brush. I'm holding Control, trying to dig in here. And what I'm going to do is actually I'm going to make the area for the mouth so it goes in. So I'm going to hold Alt, press M. That's how you take a mask away. We have this box hide here. So I'm going to left click and drag. So now I hid that area right there. Left click up. When then you click again, you bring it back. When you left click again, you bring back your whatever you hid. Alright, so now I'm going to click off that. So I'll bring that back. Okay, I don't know if that's going to work, so I'm going to Alt H. That worked. Yeah, that brought it back. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to paint a mask. I'm going to left click on mask here. And when we look here, this top button all the way to the right, we can see here's our mask brush here, right? And these are our settings for our mask brush. I want the strength to, the default is 0.5. I want this to be 1, which means 100%. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to color in here now. Okay. Basically what's going on, I want to color this in, right? Now you see what's happening here? What's going on is there's not enough geometry for me to have the kind of mask that I want. So I'm going to hold Alt, press M. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the Simplify brush. And you can see the geometry changing as I am taking my brush and going over this area here. What I'm doing is I'm adding density to the mesh. As a matter of fact, I'll do it to this part here as well. And with this density to the mesh, there should be able to be a nice mask that can be drawn now. Now, if you want to see the density, remember you can go to Overlays and then go down to Wireframe, turn that on. You'll be able to see that mesh. I'm fine for working like this for now. I'm going to go back to the mask brush. We can look and see our strength is still at 100%. So now, see that? There we go. So this is what I want for this mask, and it looks, nice and clean, which is what I wanted. Hold the middle mouse button to rotate. Okay, so now that we have that, what we're going to do is hold Control, press Control. I'm holding Control, now I'm pressing I. And what we did was we inverted the mask. So yeah, inverting selections is very useful because we had this selected, we inverted the selections. Now everything other than what we originally selected is selected. So this is all protected, which allows us to freely work here. I used to watch Star Trek, and I remember people on the ship, they'd be flying the crew of the whatever particular Enterprise, like I'm thinking Next Generation, and one of the people go invert the polarity of whatever selection, and makes me think of this because I'm like, yeah, inverting things tends to be very useful. Anyway, I'm going to go to the Blob brush, and then with the Blob brush selected, I'm going to press F, then pull my mouse to increase the radius. I'm going to hold Control so that we go in instead of coming out of, and now I'm just making the space, and I'm thinking of teeth as well as gums. Now I'm left clicking instead of dragging. Okay, I'm going to hold the mouse button. I'm going to hold Shift. Smooth some of this out. I'm going to hold Control. And then what we can do here, like see how we have the edge of the mouth? It looks kind of thin to me. We can hold Control, press I. So now we have our original mask, and then what we can do is take the Blob brush. Well, whenever you have a thin area like this, you need to be careful. Okay, when I'm saying you need to be careful, remember this. This will help you out in the future. So what I'm about to tell you is, I think, fairly important, and I just almost forgot it. I want to see this area here, how thin this is, right? It's very thin, right? I want to build this up so it's not so thin. Now, if I take the Blob brush, which will bring out, if I use it as it is, basically I'm going to hold Control. Another way, by the way, you see how I'm trying to get in close by using hold Control as well as the middle mouse button. Another way you can do this is hold Shift, press B, draw a zoom box, and now you have a somewhat better way easier way of zooming in, right? Anyway, if I take the Blob brush and I try to thicken this out, right, the Blob brush will try to push out from here, right? However, I'm going to hold the middle mouse button to rotate. I'm going to hold Control as well as the middle mouse button to zoom out. What it's going to do is, as it pushes out on... That's interesting. Well, as it pushes out on this side where the mask is, it will pull from this side. So basically, a hole will be formed, right? So how do you work to make something like this thicker when you have an area that thin? What you want to do is you want to go to Second. Okay, this right here, so we're in the upper right. You want to go down to options. Okay, you do want options. Those. Okay, you do want to go to options. Look, okay, here it goes. I'm sorry. Because there's options and then there's options. See this? So here's options here, options here. I was looking at this option. You want to be looking at this option. So the options you want to look for is, here's the blob brush, right? Here's all of the settings for the blob brush, or most of the settings for the blob brush. Now you have this options setting right next to these other settings. So you're going to click this triangle here. See this front faces only? And remember when I said, remember this because this is important? I'm going to put a check mark here. We're going to do this temporarily. And what this front faces only is going to do is, as we build this up with the blob brush, only this area that's facing us will be affected, not the other area, which is this thin part right here on the other side. If we didn't use that front faces, there would be a hole that would come through, because by default, the way Sculpt works is they'll work here as well as on the other side. By putting a check mark next to front faces only, we're only going to work with what we see right here, without, for the most part, affecting the other side, so we can work without making a hole in this mesh. Okay, so I'm going to hold the mouse button, rotate, and actually let's go to the simplify brush. This shouldn't matter as far as front. By the way, front faces, I'm pretty sure it works per brush, so be aware of that. So we have front faces turned on for the blob brush. So when I click here, we can see we have front faces turned on. I'm pretty sure you have to turn it on for each brush as you work. So now that we have that extra geometry, I'm going to use the blob brush. I'm going to press the F key to increase my radius. So now we're able to build up this geometry. I'm going to hold Control as well as the mouse button, zoom out. We'll hold Shift, which activates our smooth brush. We're just building up this geometry here. Holding Shift as well as the middle mouse button to pan, hold the middle mouse button to rotate. And you can see this moving because of our symmetry, the way our symmetry works. I'm going to hold Control, press I. I'm going to turn off this front faces so we can go back to the default. I'm going to click this arrow to shrink the view of those options there. I'm going to go to the grab brush. I'm just trying to adjust this geometry, trying to make sure that this is deep enough. Hold the middle mouse button to zoom back. Alright, I'm going to hold Alt, then press M to get rid of that mask. Okay, now we're going to go back to the mask brush. We can still see our strength is 100, which is what we want. We already increased the geometry for here. So we're drawing a mask here. Pretty much doing what we did on the bottom. So now we're going to hold Control, press I to invert like we did before. Okay, now we're going to go to the blob brush. We're going to hold, well, let's press F and then pull with our mouse to increase our radius for our brush. We're going to hold Control, and very similar to before. Left clicking, holding Shift in the middle mouse button, pan. I'm going to hold Shift to smooth. Okay, I'm going to hold the middle mouse button, take a look. I'm going to hold Control. Shift in the middle mouse button, pan. Holding Shift here. And now I'm going to hold Alt, press M. Press F to shrink the mask. Hold Control here. Okay, what I'm going to do now is hold Shift, move this out. So now when you're doing things like working on the face, don't we're probably going to use the, I'm holding Control by the way, in the Blob brush. We're probably going to use the smooth brush again, which will change a decent amount of what your work looks like. So you can put in basic details, but don't start working like you're working on the finished details now. Hold Shift. Holding Shift to smooth this out. I'm going to go to the Simplify brush and add in geometry here. Holding Shift as well as the middle mouse button, pan. Adding geometry there. Zooming back. Shift. Smooth this out. I'm going to hold the mouse button, roll the mouse wheel to zoom back. Go to the grab brush. Trying to make the base of the wings be wider. Shift. I'm thinking now about the muscles of the arms. I'm taking that inflate brush, bicep, putting that up some. Oops. Thinking of how the tricep and bicep come into play. I'm holding Shift. Holding Shift as well as the middle mouse button, pan. Shift to smooth out. As you're working your way through, remember, don't be too caught up if you start getting like some lumpiness again. Because we can use a smooth brush to get rid of that. The crease brush is very useful when it comes to sculpting. By default, it pushes in, unlike most of the other brushes. Extremely useful when it comes to working with muscle. Extremely useful. So I'm just using the crease, and I'm smoothing as well when I think I need to. And I'm trying to keep in my mind that this will change, because we'll probably use the smooth brush. So add some geometry right here. Go back to the crease brush. I'm thinking of the line that pretty much you see in front of dragons, with that kind of armor plating that runs down them. Tell you that kind of armor plating that runs down them is basically what's going through my mind right now. Kind of more so just like the thought of it. So it's kind of there. We're going to go to the snake hook brush. The snake hook brush is useful for when you want to pull things out, like the tail here, because the snake hook brush will actually add geometry as we work. So I can grab the tail and easily make it bigger, reshape it. Pretty cool. I'm taking a look. And I'm thinking as I'm looking. I think I want this part to come back here more, so I'm going to hold Shift Z. I'm going to press 3 on the number keypad to go to Orthographic View. I'm going to hold Shift, hold Control. Oh, Orthographic will probably not give me what I want, so I'm going to hold Shift, hold Control, hold the left mouse button. I'm selecting this here, so I'm going to hold Shift. So I have that area there. Now I'm going to hold Control. I put a mask on it. I'm going to hold Control, press I. I think I'm going to hold Shift, mask this here. go to the snake hook brush. Just pull that back. Press F to shrink this. I'm gonna hold Alt, press M. Shift to smooth that out. Shift to smooth that out. I was thinking here, I was thinking about, you know, having this thing actually walk. So I'm thinking about, you know, where I want to go with this. So now I'm using the inflate brush. It's making the body more dense. The neck looks very short to me. I go to edit mode. Three, Shift Z. And I'm going to hold Control, hold the right mouse button. Draw a lasso select. Around everything but the head. You have the proportional editing tool turned on. Okay, we're going to press H to hide that geometry. Should make it easier for our computer to work. Now we're going to hold Shift as well as Control. Select this part of the head. You have the proportional editing tool on, which is what you want on, by the way. That's this. You can either click here or press O to turn that on. We're going to press G, then Z. And what we're doing is we're stretching the head up. I'm going to left click to lock that stretch in. Left click on Nothingness to deselect. Hold Alt, press H to bring the body back. Now we'll zoom back. Hold Shift, press Z. So we have this stretched geometry. However, we can deal with that in Sculpt Mode. So let's go to the upper left, go to the Object Mode. I like it being our dragon a lot better with the longer neck. Let's go to Sculpt Mode. Yes, I like that a lot better. Let's zoom in, turn on dynamic topology. Let's go to our simplify brush. Add in some geometry here. Let's go to our grab brush. Shift here. I'm going to go to our Crease Brush, press F. Let's add some geometry here. I'm going to put some leg muscle in. And I told you before, don't let it get to you too much because we're most likely going to use the smooth modifier, which will take some detail away. So I'm going to click here. So you can almost like overdo things and not be too concerned about them, because basically what I'm doing here is I'm thinking of a human leg and I'm making something kind of like quadriceps. Hamstrings back here. Add some, whoops, geometry here. Shift. Let's add in some gastrocnemises. One of my favorite name muscles. I think it sounds cool. Fancy way of saying calf muscles. I'm just adding detail to the muscles, and they're, you know, made up muscles. So you want to use something that seems like it could be real. So here I'm thinking of tricep muscles. Build this up for the tricep, holding Shift. Add some geometry there. I'm gonna go to Crease. Hold Control as well as the middle mouse button to zoom in. However you build up your muscles, once you build them up, you can take the inflate brush and make them even more prominent. Let's put some geometry here. So what I'm doing is I'm going to the simplify brush. Even though I don't have wireframe on, I'm adding geometry because I know that I want to put detail in. So here I'm thinking deltoid muscles. So I put the geometry in because I figured I'd be adding this detail in.